ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome to Duran ASEAN. You're with Gowri today on your ASEAN Daily, where we bring you news from all over Southeast Asia from Mondays to Fridays starting at 8 a.m. And for now, let's move on to our politics news for today, where we have Indonesia considering declaring haze as a national disaster, and this decision to declare the haze as a national disaster has to be made by the National Disaster Management Agency, or also known as the BNPB. And well, according to the director, it seems that we all have this discussion today, but for me, it's more important about the operation instead of the terminology. And I think she's absolutely right. But calling it a national disaster does give it more a sense of urgency, especially when it comes to something like haze, and it's a recurring problem every year that we have to live with, and it's also getting worse and worse, probably the worst haze that we've had in all these years. And what is the difference? Well, the point is that we have to do the best thing for the people, she says, also for our neighbors. And she's following every day, every hour what's happening with the air pollution in Singapore. And Dr. Siti said that the forest fires and the haze problem should not affect bilateral relations, especially with Singapore and Malaysia, both hit by heavy smoke from the burning forest in Sumatra and Kalimantan. And of course, I'm referring to the Environment and Forestry Minister and Head of Task Force, Siti Nurbaya Bakar, who's also said that it's more important to tackle the problem operationally and put out the fires quickly. I mean, there is definitely a lot of ways to solve the problem, but the thing is we need all the leaders from all the countries to sit together and come up with a solid plan. And also what's more important is their commitment to the plan. A lot has been said about what can be done and what will be done about the haze, but there's been no result yet so far. And hopefully after this, after it becomes a national emergency status, the government will treat it with more urgency and also be responsible to fulfill the rights of the people, because as the government, that is one of your basic job, is to provide a healthy living environment for the people in the country. And of course, another job for them is also to channel all their resources right now to put out the fire. That's the best they can do at the moment. And hopefully there won't be any stories saying that there won't be enough funds, because according to Dr. Siti, there are already enough funds to deal with the problem. And last time that Indonesia declared a state of national emergency was actually during the 2004 Asian tsunami, which killed more than 200,000 in the country. We don't know if anyone has died due to the haze in Indonesia so far, and we doubt that, but could actually lead to someone's death, someone having a chronic lung disease or asthma due to this problem, and hope that this will be resolved very soon. And another thing also from Indonesia, still about the haze, where Indonesia is saying that they need at least 3 years to tackle the haze problem, and this is according to the president himself, Joko Widodo. And he said that Indonesia has gone to great lengths to tackle the haze, including sending almost 4,000 soldiers and 8,000 police officers, as well as 4 waterbombing planes to put out the fires. And the president also told the BBC authorities that building water reserves in the forests and canals to get water to the hotspots, while also making progress to enforce the laws against forest burning. These are some of the things that he's been working on so far. And however, we can only see some results in about 3 years, when the problem will have been solved. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, it's an annual problem in Southeast Asia and has especially intensified in the region of Sumatra for the last 3 weeks. And mostly due to the illegal fires that are set to clear vast tracts of lands to make way for palm oil and pulp as well as paper plantations. Indonesia has so far failed to halt the practice despite years and years of pressure from all the neighboring countries. So it seems that President Joko Widodo does have a plan, but we might need to take a few years before we can see the result of that. Hopefully the haze won't be so bad next year, but be prepared since it's an annual problem that we have to face. And moving on, we have a little update from Myanmar, where truce talks are not really working out, as many of the ethnic groups not ready to sign. And as we all know, there are hundreds of different ethnic groups in Myanmar, and what they're trying to do now is try to sign a peace agreement so all the different ethnic groups, especially the rebel groups, can come together to an understanding, so it'll be easier for the elections that will take place in November. And they are quite positive that a ceasefire agreement will soon be signed by Myanmar's rebel groups, and the government is not too positive though that they will actually achieve their goal, and they might have to exclude a few groups as well, according to officials involved in the talks. And what happened is one group which has continued to hold out is the Kachin Independence Organization, which controls vast areas of the Kachin state. And as recently as this week, they are actually their armed wing clashed with the government troops in the northeast, and these peace talks have actually dragged on for over 2 years, and the latest round of negotiations it actually involved about 19 groups and was held in Chiang Mai in Thailand and ended on Wednesday. And some of the ethnic organizations have agreed to draft text of the agreement in principle, but they are still holding out because they want the Arakan Army as well as the Taang National Liberation Army and also the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army to be allowed to sign the ceasefire. And Thein Sein's administration so far has rejected this request because the three do not have existing bilateral ceasefire agreements with the government. And of course this whole thing brings us back to the election that is coming up in November. How exactly is President Thein Sein's administration is going to find a common ground with all these different rebel groups in Myanmar so they can sign the agreement and move on with the elections, which is also drawing a lot of attention because a lot of people are sadly not too positive about it. Although it will be the country's first and freest general election since civilian rule was reintroduced in 2011, and that of course is ending almost 50 years of military rule in the country. And a couple of challenges that they will be facing. The first one is actually whether the voters the voters will face in reaching the polls themselves to the poll centers. Do they have their means, and how will they get there? And political parties will face their undertaking in their campaigns. Also due to the floods that occurred in July and August, the infrastructure of affected regions is currently in a very bad condition, and this affects citizens in so far that it creates quite a major difference between the region in terms of whether they are informed or not about the elections. And additionally, of course, like I briefly explained earlier, they have all these sporadic armed clashes with different ethnic militias across Myanmar, and it's still continuing with most recently having taken place in the Kachin state and the Shan state. And finally, of course, during the still ongoing period of campaigning, incidents in which representatives of the state and some political parties have engaged in problematic conduct towards ethnic and religious minorities such as the Rohingya and Muslims. This is also another issue that is kind of on top of the agenda, receiving a lot of international media attention, but still not quite a solid solution has been drawn up for this. And in order for Myanmar to transition smoothly into a democratic country, I think these are some of the challenges that they will need to overcome. And as of September 2015, it seems that news media and outlets are actually providing an increasing amount of information about the upcoming election, and we definitely look forward to receiving more and see what's gonna happen with the elections in Myanmar. And one more news before we go for a short break, where the influence of Islamic State is being highlighted in the ASEAN Plus 3 Ministerial meeting. And the influence of the Islamic State has been raised, and it's also one of the major concerns among Southeast Asian leaders, all as well as their counterparts in China, South Korea, and Japan, as they discussed just yesterday on Wednesday. And besides the fighting in Syria and Iraq, the militant group has also recruited a lot of followers from across the region, and has also been allegedly been planning attacks in Asia. And in its capacity as one of the ASEAN Plus 3 nations, Japan actually came forward and made an appeal for help from ASEAN member states. So Japan is no exception to the ISIS threat. And ASEAN nations have also expressed in their interest in technology exchanges and learning from their East Asian partners, especially when it comes to combating cybercrime. And most of the ISIS plans and plots are, of course, being disseminated through the cyberspace, using internet, using Facebook, using YouTube. And it would definitely help if ASEAN could turn its focus to technology exchanges and see what is the most effective way to overcome or to rectify the cybercrime issue. And many issues discussed in the meeting may be featured on a declaration as well on transnational crime, and is expected to sign tomorrow when ASEAN wraps up its meeting with its partners in Malaysia. And with that, we will take a very quick break, and when we come back, I'll bring you news from the economic side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello, welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're still with Gowri here on our ASEAN Daily, where we bring you news from all over Southeast Asia. And for this part of ASEAN Daily, we are going to talk about the economic side of Southeast Asia. And starting out, we have President Aquino, who is welcoming Japan's increased role in our region's stability. Not too sure what the other countries would think about that. But Japan's parliament has finally approved security bills that would allow Japan to send troops to engage in combat overseas for the first time ever since the World War II. And this new direction that Japan is taking under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has the support of the United States, which has long been cast in the role of policemen in world disputes. Of course, they are the world policemen, and Japan could also help US in helping to maintain peace in our part of the world. And I think the reason Philippines is so excited about this is because of the crisis that they have been facing with the South China Sea and whatnot. China and Korea are definitely not too happy, especially China, and they have criticized the move. And the nation, of course, these two nations are also the ones that were mostly suffering during the harsh Japanese occupation during the war, and it's understandable why they are opposing this move. And there was also a lot of opposition, even among Japanese citizens, who have come to actually understand and also value this pacifist policy that Japan has been practicing for so long. But what Japan is looking at is that they could help US in helping to maintain the peace in Southeast Asia, and Philippines has apparently come forward to support that decision by Japan. And of course, like I mentioned, Japan and China have been involved in a lot of disputes over competing claims to certain islands in the East China Sea. And last July, Japan has also voiced out against the South China Sea issue, and also they have asked China to stop building platforms in what Japan considers as its their part of the sea. And China is also involved, of course, in feuds with Philippines, Vietnam, other Southeast Asian nations as well, in claims of sovereignty over the sea, mostly which is marked with a 9-dash line. And all these maritime disputes have actually brought Philippines and Japan closer, it seems. And this has also prompted President Aquino to assert that the Philippine government clearly welcomes the Japanese, and they are also quite happy about Japanese Parliament's decision to allow the sending of Japanese combat forces to actually assist foreign allies, and the staunchest and the most reliable allies and friends. That's what the Philippines has quoted Japan. And however, with Japanese Parliament's decision, we may see an increasing public display as well of Japanese military power. And this is coming 68 years after their pacifist constitution. And we hope that we will see that this desired effect that doesn't have any discouraging rash action from any part of the disputing nation. I think it's very interesting that Japan is changing up their whole policy right here, that they can actually start getting involved, start sending their troops overseas to help out other countries. And this is also making Japan feel more comfortable, feel safer, although they already have the support of the US when it comes to the South China Sea issue. And Philippines seems to be really excited about this whole how Japan is moving away from their long-standing pacifist policy. And they think that Japan could actually be a very important ally to them. So China, be able to look out, because we have a new powerhouse in town. And moving on from there, we are going to talk about Vietnam and their economic growth and how is it picking up. Vietnam's economy apparently grew 6.81% in the third quarter from a year earlier, accelerating from 6.4% in the previous quarter, the government said. And this is mostly fueled by strong exports, manufacturing, and a record foreign direct investment. The economy has also expanded at its fastest pace this year, and the growth in the first 9 months was its highest since 2010. So Vietnam is also another powerhouse to look out for, and defying the chill from a slowdown in China and pretty much the rest of Asia. Vietnam seems to be doing pretty well and coming out strong despite all the crisis and currency war that's happening. And almost half of the January-September, they call it the Q3, the third quarter growth, came from industries like construction, and up to 9.6% from the same period last year, according to the General Statistics Office in a report. And retail and services are also growing in Vietnam year on year, and this year it has grown up to 9.8%, and therefore they are targeting they have a targeted growth in 2015 as about 6.2 to 6.5%, and this that's in line with their projection from the World Bank, and 6.5 seen by the Asian Development Bank, contrasting with forecast for bigger Southeast Asian markets that are struggling with weak exports and a sluggish retail spending. And Vietnam actually is standing out as one of the very few countries in the region that has shrugged off the global slowdown in trade. And I think Vietnam is expecting to remain strong and to keep moving forward, and also it will continue to be a bright spot in this region over the next few years. And of course, the investment in Vietnam is also being helped by the integration into a common Southeast Asian market, and we're talking about the AEC here, which is set to happen later this year, a free trade deal with the European Union as well, and it's expected accession to the US-led Trans-Pacific Partnership, which will be worth 40% of global GDP. So now we know which country in which country in Southeast Asia to look out for, which is the up and coming country, which is sort of like the new kid on the block that is scaring everyone off. And with that, I'm going to take another short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the society, arts and culture part of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're with Gowri, and this is your ASEAN Daily, where we bring you news from all over Southeast Asia from Mondays to Fridays. And yeah, that was Enter Sandman by Metallica. Hope you guys liked that song. And moving on to our arts and culture segment of Southeast Asia. And what we have here is a news from Singapore, where their population decline is at the slowest in a decade. So far they've only had 5.54 million, and this is the slowest population reported so far this decade. And the population grew 1.2% between June 2014 and 2015, according to the statistics released by the National Population and Talent Division. I think when it comes to Singapore, this is always quite an interesting issue, how they are always reported to be underpopulated, that they have more foreigners than Singaporeans themselves, and the biggest thing is they always are encouraging people to date each other, to get into relationships, to have babies. It's such a priority in Singapore. And even as more Singaporeans are getting married and having babies, it seems that they are still having the slowest growth in the decade. And this statistics, which was released just yesterday by the National Population and Talent Division, is an annual population in brief report, and also showed that the number of citizens rose to 3.38 million, mostly through birth and immigration. And there were about 20,000 new citizens last year, with 37.5% of them aged 20. And we can see with that a lot of young people moving to Singapore, probably for their education and also job opportunities that is present in the country. And the government plans to continue taking in between 15,000 to 25,000 new citizens each year to prevent the citizen population from shrinking. This is what the report said. The number of non-residents, actually, which largely comprise of foreigners working here and their families as well, rose by 2.1%, which is about 1.63 million. And this is mainly due to a slowdown in the number of foreign workers arriving in Singapore. And there are some factors, of course, which influence the population growth in Singapore, and one of it is the stable economic and manpower outlook last year influenced a lot of people's decision to move to Singapore. And they also came up with some policies by the government, like the marriage and parenthood package, where you actually get an incentive when you get married and you become a parent. And apart from that incentive, it seems that they are also looking at a consistent inflow of immigrants over the years who later become citizens, and that has also helped the Singaporean base to grow, and this is in turn also have led to more citizen birth. Singapore also has a varying amount of aging population, and according to Mr. Christopher Gee, who is a research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies, he said that the old age support ratio, if left unchecked and not addressed, will become a problem ultimately. It is not something that you can feel overnight. It's something that creeps up on you. I think he has a very good point here when it comes to the older aging population in Singapore. It will reflect as well on what they have been doing for the country, and they should be taken care of by the government for all their efforts that they've put in over the years. And if not taken care properly, it could bring up a lot of problems as well in terms of how they are getting their income, health issues, family issues, a lot of other problems that might surface from this. And it will take effect in respect to maybe lower productivity. It might be seen as lowered vitality or dynamism in the country, and all these things can compound over many years. So good luck, Singapore. I hope they keep coming up with more interesting packages to lure more people to get married and have kids in Singapore. And also in Singapore, very interesting news where Singapore has been featured in the very famous game, of course, the Call of Duty, and they call it the day Singapore came under attack in the Call of Duty. A terror attack has taken place in Singapore. This is according to BBC.com, and all part of a controversial web campaign to launch the newest title from a COD franchise. And set in Singapore in the year 2065, Call of Duty Black Ops 3 begins with a mission where players must investigate the mysterious disappearance of a CIA station. And after its worldwide release, ahead of its worldwide release on 6th of November, US-based game maker Activision launched a series of tweets setting up at the opening scene for a fictional attack in Singapore. But it seems that many social media users were not really impressed at the way things were playing out, saying that scenario was actually done in bad taste. And of course, there are also some pictures here showing the setting of the game, and also explaining how it all. But essentially, everyone thinks it's a bad idea. Although Singapore's military will not really give a comment on this or the campaign, but thousands of them have been interacting on Twitter mostly. And there was one user who also said that the Call of Duty stunt is so bad, is so irresponsible, and it stands solely as a notable failure in marketing, as an attempt to grab some attention while playing the strengths of social media during the action. Members of Singapore's gaming community, however, enjoyed the preview in tweets, and they began to hit back, and they said video games are now supposed to be realistic, and I think it's cool that developers have based scenarios in game play on real life events. Don't stop. Says a user from Japan as well. And because you'll be looking at cyber video game account and thinking breaking news events on it were real, said another Twitter user. And it also shows a lot of different pictures, a lot of different reactions on Twitter. So let us know what you think as well, Singapore being featured in Call of Duty, whether or not you think it's a good idea and what kind of effect it will have. That'll be all from me today. Please listen to us every day on www.duranasean.com. You can also listen to us on our very own app, Duran ASEAN, on both iOS and Android, and follow us on Facebook, leave some feedback on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the daily podcasts and updates on interviews. And coming up later at 9 o'clock, we have an interview with freelance writer Wong Siu Lin, who teaches you how to start a green blog. So if you're passionate about the environment and you're dying to start a blog and write about it, make sure to listen in later at 9 o'clock.